Hello everyone, you can call me Freebiewitz, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Analyse and Adapt, where I see if a video game would work in 3 different mediums. Tabletop, as in board and card games, tabletop roleplay, like Dungeons and Dragons, and finally, as a Larp. Today I'll be analysing and adapting Heroes of the Storm, a game that I'm not very good at, but am fond of regardless. So what is Heroes of the Storm? Well, Blizzard describes it as a hero brawler, which I would say is technically correct in that heroes are beating each other up and thus brawling, but it's something most other folks would call a MOBA. Now, I won't go too deeply into what that is right now, but the basic premise involves 2 teams of players backed up by waves of minions trying to destroy the enemy's core while they defend their own. So with that in mind, with some gameplay in the background, let's see if we can adapt Heroes of the Storm. So, Heroes of the Storm actually already has a tabletop adaptation, a card game in fact. More specifically, it's a Bang version of the game. Now, I've never played it myself, but I have played and enjoyed the base version of Bang. To put it simply, it's a card game in which one player is the sheriff and every other player has a secret role. It's a game about paranoia, shooting each other, and it's plenty of fun. Now, I don't know if the Bang adaptation of Heroes captures the spirit of the game, so that's why I'm here to brainstorm up our own version. At its base level, Heroes of the Storm is the MOBA Blizzard equivalent of Nintendo Super Smash Bros. Purely there for the fan service, with each hero bringing something from their own respective franchises into the game, with an almost non-existent reason on why they're actually beating each other up. So mechanically speaking, what makes Heroes of the Storm Heroes of the Storm? As I briefly touched in the intro, it's a team game where you and your buddy select a character from Blizzard's roster of video games, from the magical fantasy world of Warcraft, to the also magical but darker world of Diablo, to the sci-fi universe of StarCraft, which also happens to have alien space magic. Blizzard likes its magic if you can't tell. Anyways, to win a game, you have to destroy the enemy's core while protecting your own, clearing out enemy minions, hiring mercenaries through beating them up, and completing objectives along the way. So, right off the bat, I can tell this is a bad idea already for a board game. Each team in a usual round of heroes consists of 5 people for each team, making it a total of 10 altogether. Now, from personal experience, having 10 people play a single board game around the same table is arduous. Don't get me wrong, I had a blast doing it, but each turn seemed to take so long, and multiply that by 9, not very practical. Even Bang, the card game using expansions, can only go up to 8 players, and even then it can become cumbersome. So let's dumb it down. Just because the video game asks you to play in a game next to 9 other players, doesn't mean we have to do that for the board game version to stick to the spirit of the game. All we really need are 10 heroes from different universes running around at any given time. To that end, we can make this a 2-player game, with each side controlling 5 heroes at the same time. So, in terms of scope, we don't want to make things too complicated. In theory, we could have dozens upon dozens of minion models, a model for each hero, and their summons, all running around with the various NPCs on each map. But doing it that way would make managing each turn difficult, tedious, boring. You get the idea. I mean, what kind of madman would want to control hundreds of little models every turn? I mean, just poking them around and nudging them forwards, that would slow down the game immensely. No one would be so crazy to do that. Now, in all seriousness, I can see the appeal behind that sort of game, but the focus on that would be the army composition and the deployment of such, rather than the individual heroes. And while there are certainly many 40k army builds that are focused around a single figure, it still mostly falls to the main bulk of the army to make a difference. So, we're going to limit ourselves and make things more abstract, while hopefully keeping the spirit of the game intact. To that end, we'll only include the first 3 franchises in this board game concept. Overwatch and such can be expansions if we ever want to talk about it again, but for now, we're just going to stick with the first 3 like I've said. So, to have 2 teams of 5 heroes, we'll need a minimum of 10 different models. Ideally, we want to give each player a good selection of heroes to choose from, maybe up to 30. It's a bit much in terms of the amount of miniatures you can get in a board game, but it can be made manageable if each model was just a cardboard cutout with a plastic base. It's also not without precedent. If you look at the Risk board game, you have dozens upon dozens, maybe over 100. I can't remember the exact number. But point is, there is certainly a lot more than 30 little models in that board game alone. Another way around it is to give each model several different build cards with stats on it, similar to how War Machine/Hordes do their characters, and said character variations. For example, Arthas is a Warcraft character, very tough with abilities that make it difficult for the enemy to move when he's around. One card could make him tougher, while another makes him better at hindering enemy movement. Point is, these cards should be able to give you quite a bit of choice in how you play, despite only having one model. So, with the cards, there's two ways off the top of my head that we can do this. You can have all the character stats and abilities on a single card for the entire course of the game, just like I mentioned in War Machine/Hordes. Or, each model has one main card and is giving modifier cards as they level up, much like using enchantments or equipment cards in Magic the Gathering. So, in the video game, whenever a character levels up, their attack damage, health regeneration, maximum health, etc. all go up. So, for the sake of simplicity, we can either just give each hero a new modifier card that enhances them, or give them a straight up number that makes them better overall. Both solutions come with their own pros and cons, though personally I like the card idea because it gives us a physical and visual representation of power increasing. I can look over at someone's board state and go, oh, that guy has a lot of cards, they must be more powerful than my guy who only has one or two cards. Now that I think about it, depending on how abstract we want to go, we don't even need a board with miniatures. Just 3 lanes and a bunch of cards. This style of card games isn't without precedent either. In Legend of the Five Rings, visually there are 3 separate areas of battle, with ways of adding units to each of them, and sometimes having them change lanes as it were. If we really want to involve miniatures, however, we'd have to find a way of dumbing down minion waves as well. In a 1-to-1 adaptation of the game, we'd have to have at least 7 miniatures in each lane for both sides, which would mean setting up 42 models altogether, and that's not practical. For those of you who don't know, the 7 miniatures would represent the 3 soldiers, the 3 archers, and the mage in the middle that make up every single minion wave. That's not even putting into account the catapults and extra mercenaries, so on and so forth. Instead of doing that, we can represent each wave with a single model, bringing it down to 6 each with every wave. Towers, walls, and other structures could also be bundled up for simplicity's sake, perhaps having cards, tokens, or pips slotted somewhere to represent each surviving component. Gameplay would involve moving your heroes around, pushing with minions to destroy structures, fighting the enemy team, and finally taking out the core, with objectives in between. I haven't even gone into the specifics of how combat will work or movement and such, but I think we have at least a skeleton of the idea. To me, the spectacle of having space marines, demons, and elves fight each other will be amusing as a setting if nothing else, which moves on to our next topic. So, as a tabletop role-playing game, Heroes of the Storm at its core doesn't really work. The reason being is that every single RPG I've ever played has the same unspoken rule. Don't split the party. And in Heroes of the Storm, you kind of have to. Besides having to split up to defend your very spread out structures, players have to split up to gain experience points all over the map. Having everyone in one place means they'll get less experience points, threatening their growth compared to the other team. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes you're encouraged to group up in the same game to accomplish an objective, but the players still have to split up in the course of the game to maintain a good lead. If we split the party up in tabletop role-playing games, then the focus would be too split, meaning while one part of the party is still playing, the other part would have to wait until the Game Master goes back to them. So once again, a 1-to-1 adaptation of the game wouldn't work in any practical way. So if we can't do that, what do we have? Well, we have the idea of different genres beating each other up. You can have the magical potion-slinging old man of Diablo going up against the literal siege tank of StarCraft. This is the sort of game that GURPS revels in. But we're not talking about how to adapt a game to GURPS, we're here to talk about adapting a video game into a role-playing game all of its own. If I were to make this system from scratch, a lot of things would have to be balanced, so a fighter doesn't instantly get killed by a bullet and have no chance. Sure, we can just say the fighter is super tough, but then why play a sniper? And if the fighter dies too quickly, then why play the fighter? It's a precarious balancing act. We can always make the excuse that a wizard did it, I guess, but something Force a Nexus also works. Depending on how close we're adapting the setting, it could just be one big combat encounter. However, If we just adapt the idea of the Nexus rather than the mechanics, I think we could have something more focused on role-playing. At its core, the Nexus is a place between worlds, where everyone just so happens to fight a lot. If you and your players run a lot of different campaigns over the years, you can have some of their more notable and favorite characters come around and make cameos, adapting them to whatever systems you prefer. You could have a Warforged sorcerer from Eberron interacting with the 50-foot hero from his hero city who isn't actually 50 foot tall, but has 50 actual feet, both of whom are backed up by a Lamenta Space Marine, assuming said Space Marine doesn't instantly go into a murderous rage from seeing a sentient machine wielding sorcery and a mutant made of 50 Fae, that is. Now, there is precedent for this sort of thing as well. For example, Spelljammers in the D&D setting are magic ships that can travel from one setting to another, so you can have the high fantasy area of the Forgotten Realms interacting with the gothic horror of Ravenloft. So, as a GM, if I ever had to make Heroes of Storm a game, it would basically be my version of Super Smash Bros. Just a bunch of fan service using my players' favorite characters over the years, interacting with each other and having a party, fighting each other, whatever. It would need quite a bit of work, but I think it's something the players would enjoy, at least as a short game or a one-off. Up until now, we've been adapting Heroes of Storm into a turn-based medium, but it's time we moved on to something more in line with its original pacing, as a Larp. Can you run Heroes of the Storm as a Larp? And the answer is maybe? As I mentioned, it's a big crossover of genres. Having a knight in plate armor next to a space soldier with laser gun seems cool enough to generate plenty of interest and thus players, but mechanically it'd be messy. Putting aside leveling up, skills, magic, mechanics, so on and so forth, we also have the issue of base weaponry. For fantasy or medieval characters, it's pretty straightforward. Swords like the one in this picture could easily be used, but what do we do about characters with guns? Well, Nerf guns and the like would instantly be out. If I'm wearing plate armor and get shot in the back, it's very likely I wouldn't even notice being hit, especially if I'm distracted with fighting someone else in front of me. The answer then would be to have something that hits a bit harder, like gel balls, but then the issue becomes protection, specifically for the face. Now, I don't play gel ball myself, but my friends who do tell me it hits hard enough to leave a bruise, which means everyone would be forced to wear some sort of eye protection at the very least. I'm also told that you can't shoot someone from point-blank range, since some can hit hard enough to break or even shatter plastic, which can be a problem when the guy with the sword wants to be in point-blank range in the first place. That in of itself would be a great way of balancing guns from a meta perspective now that I think about it, but it does put into question the balance of guns overall. If you can't shoot someone in melee range, does that mean if you play in tight quarters, swords would always beat you? So, in Larp, the bow, despite having superior range, is balanced in that for every shot you can put out with it, a sword can swing many more times. The specific Larp I attend makes each arrow deal twice the damage of each sword swing, and it still feels like the sword would come out on top of most of the time, meaning people with bows and arrows have to play strategically, or with support. Gel ball guns, however, can have multiple shots for every sword swing that another player performs, making them that much more better for damage. Now, this can be balanced by giving everyone tons of HP, and making each sword strike do leagues damage above what each gel ball would deal, but it would be awkward balance to maintain. That, and once again, gel balls hurt. If being shot 60 times is equivalent to being hit 3 times with a sword, I would take being hit by a sword every day of the week. Another way we could balance it out is by limiting the type of gel ball weapons to slower firing types so they don't have to unload dozens of shots into a single person. While Heroes of the Storm does have rapid firing weapons from Tychus and to a lesser degree Raynor, they're mostly in the minority. Still, it does cut down on what's available in terms of weaponry choice. Then we have the hordes of minions and structures. Now, minions, of course, could be NPCs, or be played by players in between respawn times to give them something to do while dead. In such cases, they'd need something like a band to represent the fact that they're minions. As for structures, we could have people play them, or maybe some sort of marshal counting the amount of hits if said structures are actual, structures. We could probably use a tree or something else big, even using markers if we need to. But the point is, there's too many things to keep track of to make it practical. The actual idea of minions pushing a lane with cores at either end sounds more like a specific game mode than an actual full-blown Larp. unless the war on both sides is more abstract and in the background, I suppose. Personally, I like the idea, but I wouldn't recommend it even as a setting. If guns are more effective, then why swing a sword? If a gun isn't that good, then why use a gun? To me, the appeal would be seeing all the different characters from different genres interacting with each other, and if one genre is inherently better than another, then it kind of discourages the variety that you'd otherwise see. And that's discounting the previously mentioned safety issues involved. In that regard, the idea of a sci-fi, fantasy, and other genre-type characters all in one place is not something we'll probably see anytime soon. Unless it was like in a non-combat setting, something where people would just hang out, talk, and, maybe eat food. I think I just described a cosplay convention. So that's my analysis of Heroes of the Storm and how it can be adapted into 3 different mediums. How do you think it'd work? Have any of you tried adapting any elements of the game yourself, and if so, how did it go? And what game should I add to my to-do list? Comment, subscribe, and like, and maybe, just maybe, we'll come back to the subject some other time in the future. Thank you for watching. This is Freebiewitz, signing off.